Good morning, I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Keren Moscow. Here are the stories we're following today.
We begin with the drama surrounding the highly anticipated decision into the United States' first exchange-traded fund tied directly to Bitcoin. We get the latest from Bloomberg's John Tucker. John, what's the latest?
And Nathan, you can add this to the long list of twists and turns in the 10-plus year effort to bring a spot Bitcoin ETF to market. Somebody hacked the X account of the Securities and Exchange Commission. It made a false post the SEC had approved a Bitcoin ETF. Well, the agency quickly denied any approval and said its X account had been compromised. The false post on the SEC's X account was up for a number of minutes before the agency clarified it was inaccurate. But in that period, Bitcoin posted a jump to almost $48,000 before falling back to $45,000. About a dozen companies have applied to list ETFs backed by Bitcoin in the U.S. The SEC has until today to take action at least on one of those applications. I'm John Tucker, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, John, thank you. Well, now we want to get the latest on the grounded Boeing 737 MAX 9. The planemaker's CEO Dave Calhoun says the company will have to face its own shortcomings as it deals with the door plug blowout on last week's Alaska Airlines flight.
We're going to approach this, number one, acknowledging our mistake. We are going to approach it with 100% and complete transparency every step of the way. We're going to work with the NTSB, who is investigating the accident itself to find out what the root cause is. I have a long experience with this group. They're as good as it gets.
And Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun fought back tears as he addressed an all-hands meeting on the incident. Alaska and United Airlines say they've discovered more MAX 9 jets with loose bolts after the FAA ordered the model grounded. Formal inspections still have not yet begun.
All right, Karen, let's turn to politics now. A federal appeals court appears skeptical of Donald Trump's claim that he's immune from prosecution on charges that he illegally tried to overturn the 2020 election. Bloomberg's Amy Morris reports from Washington.
The former president was in the courtroom during the hearing when Appeals Court Judge Florence asked a Trump lawyer whether a president would be immune for having taken a bribe or ordering SEAL Team 6 to murder a political rival. Trump's legal team responded that the president would have to be impeached and convicted first. At a press conference after the hearing, Trump said that denying him immunity would cause, quote, bedlam in the country. Trump is also expected to sit in on a hearing tomorrow in his civil fraud case in New York. In Washington, Amy Morris, Bloomberg Radio.
All right, Amy, thanks. So we're learning more about the hospitalization of Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin and the lapse in communication regarding his whereabouts. Austin had prostate cancer surgery on December 22nd and was readmitted to the hospital on New Year's Day because of complications. National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby explained the timeline surrounding Austin's condition and when the president knew about it.
He was not informed until last Friday that Secretary Austin was in the hospital. He was not informed until this morning that the root cause of that hospitalization was prostate cancer.
National Security Council spokesperson John Kirby, the White House has announced a review of protocols around cabinet secretaries who are unreachable or incapacitated.
Well, another cabinet secretary, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, is still in the Middle East, Karen. He meets today with Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas. In Tel Aviv yesterday, Blinken said Israel must stop undercutting Palestinian governance and rein in settler violence.
Israel must stop taking steps that undercut Palestinians' ability to govern themselves effectively. Extremist settler violence carried out with impunity, settlement expansion, demolitions, evictions, all make it harder, not easier, for Israel to achieve lasting peace.
And Secretary Blinken has met with the leaders of Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Turkey during his latest Middle East trip.
Well, Nathan, we want to get back to the markets and update you on a story we told you about yesterday. It is now official. Hewlett-Packard Enterprise has agreed to buy Juniper Networks for $14 billion. The maker of data center hardware will pay $40 a share in cash for Juniper. That price represents more than half of HPE's $21 billion market value and a 32% premium over Juniper's closing price before talks of a deal emerged.
Sticking with the tech theme, Karen, CES, the Consumer Technology Association's annual trade show of all things tech, is underway in Las Vegas, and Bloomberg technology reporter Ed Ludlow is covering the show for us.
Day one at CES Las Vegas, and the theme is definitely AI everything. Take, for example, Walmart. a big box retailer, but putting a lot of emphasis on a new generative AI search tool in the Walmart app on iOS only. Instead of searching for a specific item, the generative AI search allows you to look for an event or a theme. Then there's a kind of mainstay announcement. What was interesting is Google and Amazon both went after Apple's AirPlay. So in Google's case, they're working on the ability to cast video from an Android smartphone to a TV. Amazon actually went a step further. They've developed technology where you can stream video from either an Android phone or an iOS or iPhone to Amazon's own TV hardware. Ed Ludlow for Bloomberg News in Las Vegas, Nevada.
All right, Ed, thank you. Well, Ed did mention Amazon, and they are also making news this morning on a different front. Bloomberg News has learned Amazon's live streaming site Twitch is poised to cut 35% of its staff, and that's about 500 workers. Time now for a look at some of the other stories making news around the world, and for that, we're joined by Bloomberg's Amy Morris. Amy, good morning.
Good morning, Karen. More than 40 states are under blizzard, wind, snow, or flood alerts. Winter storms continue to blanket the country. Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolan.
Significant storm system that spent the last 24 hours wreaking havoc from the Great Lakes to the Gulf Coast, now lifting out of the Northeast. The worst of the weather this morning across eastern portions of New England. But we'll still see snow on the backside of the system from Michigan into parts of the Ohio and Tennessee River valleys. Scattered showers are possible over Virginia and the Carolinas. The heavy rain, though, in northern New England should end, as should the snow. But windy conditions will continue from the mid-Atlantic into the Northeast today.
Bloomberg meteorologist Rob Carolan. Senate Republican leaders say Congress will need another temporary spending measure to avoid a partial government shutdown in 10 days. House Republican Matt Rosendale of Montana tells ABC he does not support the bipartisan compromise on spending cap.
We're still looking at about a $1.6 trillion spend in discretionary spending, and we're going to be holding a press conference with members of the House and Senate saying that we are more concerned with securing our southern border and making sure that that is taken care of than we are in writing another check to Joe Biden to continue his agenda.
And the Senate Republican John Thune says they will need a stopgap measure to March. Minority Leader Mitch McConnell acknowledged there's just not enough time to resolve lingering spending differences before the deadline.
We need to prevent a government shutdown. And so the obvious question is, how long does the CR need to be? And that'll be up to the majority leader and the speaker to determine the length.
But House Speaker Mike Johnson has said he will not bring a continuing resolution to the floor for a vote. Vice President Kamala Harris was back in Atlanta for a roundtable discussion on protecting voting rights.
We have seen in the state of Georgia, by example, of what is happening in the country, anti-voter laws that have limited drop boxes, have made it illegal to even provide food and water to people standing in line, often for hours.
Vice President Harris met with city and state leaders near the Georgia Tech campus. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg. Karen.
All right, Amy, thank you. Well, we do bring you news throughout the day right here on Bloomberg Radio, much as Amy said, but now also, as she said, you can get the latest news on demand whenever you want it. You just subscribe to Bloomberg News Now to get the latest headlines at the click of a button. You can get informed on your schedule. You can listen and subscribe to Bloomberg News Now on the Bloomberg Business app, Bloomberg.com, plus Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts. And it's time now for the Bloomberg Sports Update. Here's John Stashower. John.
Karen, just 2 years ago, Mike Vrabel was the NFL Coach of the Year. He coached the Tennessee Titans to the AFC Championship game back in 2019, but after 4 straight winning seasons, 2 seasons under 500, 6-11 this past year, and the Titans have fired Vrabel, and that immediately begins speculation that he could become the new coach of the New England Patriots, assuming Bill Belichick departs. Vrabel played for the Patriots for 8 years, won 3 Super Bowls. The biggest underdog of Wild Card Weekend, the Pittsburgh Steelers. They have to go play red-hot Buffalo, and the Steelers won't have their best defensive player. T.J. Watt out with a knee injury. Mason Rudolph will be their quarterback, and he was the third-string QB for much of this season. Tyrese Halliburton has the strained hamstring injury, but it could have been worse. He's going to miss only a couple of weeks. Halliburton averaging 24 points a game. He leads the NBA in assists. The Knicks have won 5 straight since they made that trade with Toronto. They blew out Portland. The Lakers topped Toronto by 1. Anthony Davis scored 41. Memphis just lost John Morant for the season, but had a win at Dallas as Desmond Bane scored 32. Minnesota improving to 26-10 with a win in Orlando. Detroit falling to 3-34. The Pistons blown out by Sacramento. Purdue, number 1 in college basketball, lost at Nebraska. Huskers beating number 1 for the first time in 41 years. And second-ranked Houston, who was undefeated, was upset by Iowa State. John Stashower, Bloomberg Sports.
From coast to coast, from New York to San Francisco, Boston to Washington, D.C., nationwide on SiriusXM, the Bloomberg Business app, and Bloomberg.com. This is Bloomberg Daybreak.
Good morning. I'm Nathan Hager. As we still wait for a decision from the Securities and Exchange Commission on approvals for the first spot Bitcoin ETFs, investors briefly thought that decision was made yesterday, only to find out the SEC's social media had been hacked, raising new questions about security at the agency tasked with ensuring the security of your investments. Bloomberg's Kriti Gupta is here with us now. Kriti, to call this an embarrassment for the SEC seems like it might be understating things.
Yeah, it's a really interesting and almost ironic situation that you see from the SEC and, of course, a lot of these Bitcoin issuers, because at its core of the concern about this ETF was simply this idea that Bitcoin is a very volatile asset. It's a decentralized asset. It's a hard to track asset. And that means that if you start to create a vehicle, in this case, an ETF, that allows the masses and the general public easier access to this volatile cryptocurrency, basically, what might the repercussions of that be? Cybersecurity was one of them. Hacking was one of them. So it's only kind of ironic on a day where, or I guess the day before, where largely the expectation was that the SEC would actually give some sort of approval. That expectation also shared, by the way, by our Bloomberg Intelligence ETF team, that this is exactly how it all plays out on, by the way, a social media platform owned by Elon Musk, who himself has been quite an advocate for the cryptocurrency.
And he's also been at loggerheads with SEC Chairman Gary Gensler in the past, not just about crypto, but about his own trying to get Tesla to go private. We remember that 420 tweet a while back and the history that Elon Musk has with the SEC.
Yeah, and ironically, the SEC is now going to be investigating themselves for the idea of simply, did the call kind of come from inside the house at the end of the day, because it's been investigated from the social media platform, from X's perspective about the actual hack itself. And it's been found out that it actually wasn't a flaw in the platform itself. In fact, someone got a hold of a number associated with the account because the account didn't have two-factor verification. They were able to post something like this. But now there's a big question about whether that person or that individual or that organization was within the SEC. And for that, ironically, again, the SEC now investigating themselves for market manipulation because it did move billions of dollars in cryptocurrency.
Yeah, it's more than just an irony. It's raising a lot of questions about security in and of itself within the SEC. Does this affect the timeline for whatever the SEC is going to decide about Bitcoin ETFs to have this kind of hiccup?
So the expectation is that it shouldn't affect the timeline. So by the end of today, basically, we should get an actual decision by the SEC about whether they or not they approve, or at least make a decision on at least one of the ETFs that have filed. Remember, we have, I believe, 6 that are currently the attention is on. It could pave the way for plenty more after that. So it shouldn't change the timeline. If it does, however, it would be one to mark for the history books, because never in history of the SEC's approval process for ETFs, regardless of whether it's a Bitcoin ETF or just a different kind of asset class, do they reject ETFs this late in the process? And that's why you start to see a lot of the consensus, again, including Bloomberg Intelligence, saying that this ETF process for Bitcoin should be a no-brainer, simply because they wouldn't have let it get this far if approval wasn't in the cards.
Is this going to raise questions about the approval process itself, to have this kind of question raised about when the approval happened after seeing that errant tweet yesterday?
I think it won't necessarily change the approval process because this was something that the SEC has been very out front about, very transparent about their concerns about Bitcoin in particular. I think it might create a little bit more of hesitancy on the investor standpoint because this was supposed to be the moment where you kind of let open the floodgates for a lot of people to get that easier access to cryptocurrency and more easily included in their portfolios. But that might now be met with a little bit more hesitancy because it re-ups a lot of those issues of security, who's behind it, who's involved, and frankly, the fact that it is a decentralized currency and you can't track it, which is why it's so hard, even in this particular scenario, to say who is behind this cyber attack.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Today, your morning brief on the stories making news from Wall Street to Washington and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed at 6 a.m. Eastern each morning on Apple, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning starting at 5 a.m. Wall Street time on Bloomberg 1130 in New York, Bloomberg 99.1 in Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 in Boston, and Bloomberg 960 in San Francisco.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130.
Plus, listen coast to coast on the Bloomberg Business app, SiriusXM, the iHeartRadio app, and on Bloomberg.com. I'm Nathan Hager.
And I'm Keren Moscow. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day right here on Bloomberg Daybreak.